Three women, three generations, three books, two countries, one cult. My name is Bonnie Zampino. I'm your host, and this is The Cult on the Cape. Joining us again today are three women who are all three authors. We have with us Carrie Buddington, Beth Granger, and Sarah Patrick. Welcome back, ladies.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Bonnie.
It's great to see you again as we continue on together this journey of your lives, starting out in the community of Jesus in Grenville Christian College, the affiliated boarding school in Canada, and your lives there leading up to today's episode, where we're going to explore with you what led up to your decision to leave the cult that you were living in, and the process and the experience of leaving. So I really appreciate you all taking the time to share your stories with us today. If I understand correctly, Beth, chronologically, you were probably the first to begin that process of leaving. Would you mind starting us out talking about what really was happening with you up to that point where you made those decisions?
Sure. I was 28. I was born there. And like my book is called Born and Raised, Razed. So by the time I was 28, I was becoming deeply aware of my unhappiness, which felt really rebellious actually, because our happiness didn't matter. In fact, we were supposed to be living a life of sacrifice, and if you wanted to be happy or fulfilled, that was in itself rebellious. But I couldn't ignore it, and I felt also I was feeling more and more restless and just deeply sad. It didn't help that two things, well, there were a couple things that sort of catalysts that pushed me over the line. But one was, and there's a whole chapter in my book called Bootcamp, and that happened when I was 25. But the scars were still fresh. For a whole year, I was a part of a group of women, young women my age, who were treated to far more intense discipline than we were used to. All staff and members of the community lived very disciplined, and we also were used to getting punished for our sins. But this was well beyond the norm. And for a year, we lived without beds, for example. We weren't allowed to take showers, wear makeup. We couldn't read or watch movies or any media. Like it was just so much restriction, and uh, we were all being treated like we were, I don't know, incarcerated, basically. It was extremely difficult time. And I was still getting over that. And then I didn't want to take single vows. That was another thing. Like if you weren't married, you were pressured to accept that God's will was that you needed to commit to being single in a vow ceremony. And I was really scared of either becoming a sister or having to take that vow ceremony. And so then I was starting to worry that I'd never get married, because we couldn't marry outside of the cult. I didn't know it was a cult, but we couldn't marry outsiders. And as I was approaching my late 20s, it looked like I was basically, I'd lost all hope of getting married. My only hope had been this one relationship that was with a man who broke it off 8 months into our relation, our engagement, for no reason. And he actually worked with me in the same office, and I was devastated. And that, just the pain of going through that breakup, and also imagining my life as a single woman, I felt like a beast of burden there. Basically, the single people were just, they did the most amount of work, I think. And I just could see my life just going for decades, as this spinster. And I just couldn't take the unhappiness that, you know, just the deep, I don't know. I was so unhappy. And what pushed me, funnily enough, over the line, to get the courage to leave. Because even then, while I was unhappy, I didn't consider leaving because I really took my vows seriously. I'd taken lifetime vows of obedience, as we all did. And but then my knee was so painful one year around that time, and I needed surgery. And as part of the recovery, I actually was the doctor suggested that I go to physio and then to the YMCA for like Aquafit. And just getting out into the community and like a couple times a week and meeting other people out there and finding people who are making friends. And then I got to mix and mingle with the outside heathen world. And and I realized that I was actually happier out there than I was back at the ranch, as it were. So back at campus. And so I just started to see the world from a new perspective, and I started to feel like a caged animal, and I started to just question everything. And things just snowballed. I started to be in light sessions and realizing that instead of me taking the accusations of my sin to heart, I started getting angry. And I started like thinking these people are ridiculous. And I didn't think they were abusive. I just thought I couldn't take the bullshit. Like some of the stuff was actually, I could see it for what it was. It was not it wasn't even truth. People were accusing me of things that I used to think were so bad, and like I internalized them, but then I started to realize that they were making things up. And anyway, long story short, I finally decided, like, it took me 3 years to leave. The first step I did was I got permission to move off campus, which at that time, staff weren't allowed to work there unless they lived on campus and committed for life. So that was a big step and a big deal that I asked and was granted permission to move off campus but still work there. And then it took me 3 years to get the courage to actually break ties altogether. And when I did, it was not because I thought the place was abusive or wrong or bad. It was because I felt like a black sheep in a white flock, and I felt that for whatever reason, I didn't fit in. And that if I was trying to still fit in, I was not living authentically for whatever reason. And I, there's a lot more to that story. It's in the book. Get the book. But yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people didn't leave because of finances, because we weren't paid much at all. But funny thing, I actually was given an inheritance, a sizable, I mean, it was big, $40,000, when I was 24. And it didn't occur to me that that was my key to freedom until when I actually left, and made my way in the world. And it's funny because I was so, to me, that shows how indoctrinated I was because I didn't even consider using that money to hightail it. So, yeah, I think that gives the gist of my story.
I mean, the idea that it was in stages for you makes sense, especially after years and years and years of indoctrination. Um, I
Yeah, and I was so afraid to like I was so afraid to leave everyone that I knew. Like I didn't have the guts to do that. Some people, that's what most people do is they just go, they big escape. But for me, I was like, I wanted to keep everyone back there on good terms. That was the other thing. I had seen so many people leave and be shunned, and I didn't want to be shunned. So I even would go back there for church here and there, and I went back there for my wedding. Like the people who were in my wedding were still members, like my wedding, my bridesmaids were still staff members there. Um, because I didn't have anybody out in the world that was, friends, and I didn't have yeah, I felt so alone. But yeah, I tried to do that impossible, like bridging the gap. It finally I had to cut ties. But even when I cut ties, I didn't realize that Grenville was at all a problem or the community was. I just thought I couldn't do it anymore. Yeah.
I,
you
I'm raising my hand because you won't be
sorry,
able
go
to see me
ahead.
do that. But I have a question. So this the fear of shunning, I just can't get my mind around that you got married there. And how did that feel? Like, did you feel there were people that were like maybe not saying anything and it wasn't done like overtly, but did you feel anything from them that you
Yeah.
were,
I did.
yeah.
All those years. So when I left and moved out into the nearby town of Brockville, and then I worked by day at Grenville. I walked around feeling like I felt like Hester Prynne in The Scarlet Letter. I just imagined everybody expecting the worst of me. I figured they thought I was living in sin with people. I was, this rebellious, terrible person. And I just really wanted to keep what possible relationships I could to sort of salvage them. Um, and that's why I just, I invited every single Granville person to my wedding. and 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 I assumed that they probably thought the worst, but I realized I didn't have the words or the capacity to explain myself. Yeah.
How
It was
did you
hard.
get, yeah, how did you get to the place where you finally did cut off ties with them?
I didn't actually cut off, like ties until I Grenville closed, and then all of the truth and all of the allegations of abuse exploded online and in the media, and that's when my eyes were open because so it was 2001 when I left, 2003 when I got married, so I went back there for that, and then 2007 when they closed. And by then, I was falling apart. I was starting to need therapy, blah, blah, blah. And then when I started reading all the people pouring out their stories online, that's when my eyes got open. And that's when I aligned myself with those people who were telling their stories. And then I joined the lawsuit. And by joining the lawsuit, I was very aware that I was essentially losing any hope of friendships and friendships with anyone who was a defender of Grenville. And yeah, that was a tough decision because my parents were included in that group. So yeah,
Wow, that is so much and a long time to try to straddle those two worlds. Um, did were you able to make friends outside of Grenville?
I struggled. One thing at Grenville that we got, or the community, we were so good at meeting people and getting to know people and I was very sociable, and it was easy for me to, like at work, I was a teacher. It was easy for me to just talk to any colleagues, and everyone thought I was very, I guess, friendly, but I also overshared. And then because we were used to oversharing. So I think
Okay.
I turned people off that way. I was, what's the word? I was a overachiever, and I was trying to, as any cult member is, and I was trying to, prove myself. So I think I turned people off that way too, because I was like super teacher. Um, and so I got burned a few times with colleagues, and I started to retreat and realize I don't know who I can trust. I don't know how to actually find people that are kindred spirits. And yeah, for like literally it's been 20 years that I've been in my town, and I am only now getting to make good friends with people. And it's because of the book, because people read my book and invited me to book clubs and stuff like that. And it's funny when you share so vulnerably, it it can be a really good way of breaking, building bridges between people you never knew before. And now I'm really actually so happy. That's been a massive silver lining to writing the book. But yeah, it was really hard. I did not have friends, good friends for years. So that's starting.
So, Sarah, I'm interested. You were also staff at Grenville at the time that Beth was, yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Do you remember her leaving?
I don't remember her leaving, but I remember in her book she recounts, like, I remember everything that she recounts prior to her leaving. And I was part of her torture police, I think. I was, we all lived in the dorm together, and I mean, I wasn't hands-on with her boot camp, but I was part of the machine that was um, hurting her and the staff kids and whatnot. So that's been very difficult for me. But as far as her leaving goes, I just remember bits and pieces of her not being on campus. I do remember her, but I don't think you'd left. I think it was just that you were living the first stage of the living off campus and working. I
Yeah.
remember that, and I remember being jealous of you, incredibly jealous that you were not living there. I couldn't understand it. It didn't compute in my mind because of our vows and all of that. I just couldn't understand. And I thought, how did she get that? And I was
I
also locked in
asked.
that kind of I also was kind of locked in that shunning part. Like, well, she must be bad,
Mhm.
right? Although I wasn't privy to that information. So
I mean,
anyway,
you just assume, like that's what people would assume, because
you'd
anytime someone was
assume
on a
that's right.
some kind of discipline or anyone's doing something different, you just assume that
Yeah. Yeah.
they're out of Jesus
But I
or
didn't
whatever.
compute the fact that you were gone and still working. It didn't seem right. It seemed
Yeah.
unfair. Isn't that
It
crazy?
was
I'm
not it was
sorry,
not
Beth.
generally done. So I understand. I mean, I think
I
I
owe
would have
Beth a
felt
lot
the
of
same way.
apologies. Yeah. Anyway,
Sarah,
yeah.
did you confess your jealousy in a light group when feet double washing or no?
I probably was forced to. Everybody would have their spidey senses going when, they knew when you were jealous. Like they would, like you couldn't often volunteer it because people knew, right?
They knew
It's
even
weird.
when you weren't, for sure.
I was recently talking with the the people who were involved with the boot camp, and they were apologizing, which was wonderful because they read the book, and I thought that was, I mean, I don't expect apologies, but it's nice to get them right. But one thing one of them said was they just thought that they were caring for us. They thought that this was a way that God was allowing them to care for us in a special way. And I said to them, like, doesn't that seem weird that you thought it was care? And, and my mom was similar. My mom said she looked at the boot camp scenario and thought that we were all getting so close to God that way and so close to one another. And yeah, the way we used to look at things was just so skewed
And
and so, yeah. Sorry.
I was just
Yeah.
going to say it came directly from the mothers because I remember talks, I remember tapes
Yeah.
where the ultimate caring for somebody was to address their sin.
Yeah.
So we didn't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
It was given to us. It was indoctrinated into us to believe
Yeah.
that. And yeah,
Yeah.
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 So
The boot
Sarah,
camp was,
I'm
yeah.
so sorry. I was actually going to ask if you guys could talk about this boot camp because that just is like mind blowing.
Uh, yeah, we slept on army cots, which they feel like cement. Um, we, s- there were 12 of us and we had to sleep in one living room. And we weren't allowed to have, well, as I said, we couldn't have baths or showers. We were given
A
buckets
bucket.
a
I remember
bucket
the
and a
buckets.
sponge. Yeah, for our
Sponge bath.
sponge baths. And then we worked from anytime we weren't working in our regular jobs, we were given like dirty work to do around the school. And everything was just so regimented and light sessions every meal. And I think for me, one of the hardest things was that we were expected to look awful. No makeup, no hair products, no hair dryers, nothing. So like, and we worked in the Grenfell, the students, they noticed everything about staff. Like they would notice what you're wearing, they notice everything. And we were only allowed to wear two outfits. So we, we looked terrible and it was really embarrassing. I felt so ashamed. But yeah, it was just to break us further and have us more get closer to God and depend on God. And
What, how
yeah.
many, there were 12 of you, and what had you done
Oh,
to,
we met with we had regular retreats with the mothers, and this was Mother Betty, and she came up for our Christmas retreat. I used to dread Christmas. Like, oh my God. Anyway, she came up for a retreat and she met with all of us. She was meeting with all the staff, but in groups, small groups. So she met with all these single women, and I thought the meeting was fairly good. Like none of us got completely destroyed at the meeting. And then the next day we were called back and we were told that she had serious concerns about our spiritual, um, our, I don't know,
Yeah. Spiritual
our
state.
spirituality. And we were called bitches and heat. We were told we were, uh, all we cared about were men. And we were told, that we were just, living, I can't remember everything. It was basically a whole ton of sins were hurled at us, and that we needed to repent. So God was calling us to do something very special. Um, and I thought it might last for a week, maybe two. It lasted a year. So yeah, it basically further broke us.
Yeah.
I'm not friends with anyone in that boot camp anymore. Like it really broke us apart from each other. It really destroyed our ability to trust each other. There are only a couple of women in that group who have read my book and expressed like similar feelings. Do you know what I mean? The rest of them are
Mhm.
silent and none of us want anything to do with each other. It's really sad.
Well, the memories are too painful.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
and I'm certain that that was the point. I mean, I
Mhm.
believe that so much basically of everything that happened to us and was done to us was to make sure that we didn't trust each other, because just like we didn't have time downtime to think or reflect. We also didn't have friendships because that would, I mean, that could break up the cult.
Yeah.
Sarah, you said you remember being a part of the boot camp. So were you a single person, a single woman then? Like, how did you end up not getting pulled into that? And what was your
Exactly.
experience?
That's exactly it. I remember when this thing happened, and I couldn't believe, like, I heard wind of it and I thought that I would be involved, like I would be one of the girls in it. Even though I was older, I thought I was so afraid. And
Hmm.
so when it was so then when we found out who was in it and that these other two women were in charge and it wasn't me and I wasn't involved in any way, I couldn't believe it. And I had experienced a boot camp when I first came to Grenville as a new staff. They had a boot camp for the new staff. Those who, I don't know, there weren't very many of us from the out, like who were students who came back, but it was mostly staff kids that had become new staff. And it wasn't as bad as Beth's. It was called Corpus Christi.
I remember
And I
that.
think it was formed on the same principle that the young people are off, like there's something wrong with the young people. And, we never had to sleep on cots. We could sleep in our rooms, but we had every meal together and they were all light sessioned.
Mm.
And we were taken out of our jobs and we had to go to the dorm. They were building the boys' dorm and we were the manual labor in the barn or in the dorm. So I had experienced that and I was like so damaged by that experience. And she's so right when Beth said that it fractured the relationships so to the point where couldn't reconnect to those people anymore. That's what happened to me with those people. Same thing. It was so traumatic. What the light sessioning was so, and the taken out of the school, and being separate and all of that. When her boot camp started, I was like freaked out because I had been through it. I'd been through something like that. Not as bad at all, but it was bad enough for me. So it was horrible. I couldn't stand watching these girls. I couldn't
Mm.
stand it. It was horrific. And at the same token, I was just thanking my lucky stars that it wasn't
Yeah.
me. And I don't think I don't think at that time I was involved in light sessions with you guys. I feel like it was
No.
separate, like you were kind of separate, and there weren't
Yeah.
community members at large
Hmm.
or community members involved with you guys at that point. But I could be wrong. Like I might not remember.
No, we were kept to ourselves. We ate with each other. We did
Yeah,
everything like
yeah,
our little separate group, and only the two leaders plus
yeah.
Farnsworth were involved in our light sessions. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, as far as the lasting relationship on the relationship or lasting effects of the relationships was that those people that were in my boot camp, I could never connect with them. I couldn't trust them because in these light sessions, it wasn't just two
Each
people
other.
correcting us. It
Yeah.
was we were correcting each other. Which leads into a story about when say it later, about a boot camp member who after leaving Grenville and going out in the world, I ended up getting hired by this person who was a member of the boot camp. That's
Hmm.
another story, and it's a good story. It is a good story,
It's-
but yeah, tough, really tough.
Carrie, your experience, these are the mothers from the community of Jesus where you were residing, going up to Grenville as they did fairly regularly. Do you recall similar type boot camps happening at the C of J, the community of Jesus?
Yes, absolutely. Um, I'll just mention briefly, the band had its own version of the boot camps. They weren't month long and they weren't year long, but every weekend we'd go through similar things, sleeping on the floor, rolling in the mud, um, being yelled at and degrading language all the time. But also groups within the community would be singled out and put on month-long boot camp type experiences. My oldest daughter, when she was a teenager and in high school, all the teenage girls were made to live together in the basement of one of the houses. And at that time, it was an unfinished basement, and they slept on cots, um, and weren't allowed to use the shower, had to do sponge baths. And the entrance to the cellar was an outdoor bulkhead. And this was all through the winter. They had to go in
Wow.
and out
Wow.
through the outside. Um, all kinds of weather. And this is Massachusetts, so the winters are cold and snowy and icy. Uh, and I remember expressing my dismay at this and being told, "Oh, it'll toughen them up. They'll learn to appreciate what they have once they get through this experience." Um, and there were other groups too, like they would take a group of men, and they would take them away from their wives and their children, and they'd have to go to a separate house and live together. And this would be for like 6, 8 months at a time, um, just pulling them out of their families and making them do light sessions with each other and tear each other down. And the purpose was, uh, of course, to get them to repent and give their lives to God and come out stronger men on the other side. But it just tears you down, and it
Yeah.
tears the families up to have the fathers gone for so long.
Wow.
And the single
It,
women in the community too were also targeted and put on disciplines as a group. There weren't that many as there were in Grenville. There'd be like maybe 3, 4, but yeah, they'd be singled out also for these group kind of experiences.
wow.
And Kay and Judy, I mean, it's on one of the teaching tapes. I'd love to find it sometime. Judy says specifically that all of our problem is our self-will, and what is encompassed in that will is everything: our desires, our opinions, our thoughts, our choices. She comes right out and says this, and that all of that
Yeah.
has to be broken down and stripped from us.
Wow. That explains a
How
lot.
anybody could see that as productive, healthy, or Christ-like is beyond me. I mean, at the time, we accepted it. We were brainwashed. And they spun it as God's will. They would quote scriptures from the Bible about sacrifice and giving all for Christ and that kind of stuff. And so they made it seem sense. They made it sound like it was sensible at the time, but looking back on it, it's horrendous.
I've been spending a bit
Yeah.
of time listening to the mother's tapes, and so much of it is word salad. Like just talking
Yeah.
in circles, and it's sounds really holy and wonderful, and it's like, what are you
Yeah.
even saying? So Sarah,
Mhm.
um can we talk a little bit about, so you remember this boot camp, and so what happened with you and what brought you to leave, and what was
I think that so I came back as a staff member in 86. So now by 96, so I guess 10 years later, um, it was right. Tell me if I'm wrong, Beth, or not, but I think that's the transition from the Farnsworths going into retirement was close or coming up or something, and things started to kind of change a little bit. And um, so in 96 there was a perfect storm of personal things that not related to Grenville that happened in my life. Like my parents' marriage split up and or they got divorced, and my dad remarried right away, and then within about 6 months my mother passed away. It was a very difficult year for me, and I just couldn't cope with it anymore. So this was 96, and I just started to drink. I think things had loosened up a bit in the community, and I remember like we weren't allowed to go to bars and just drink. We could start to drink, like we could drink with a meal or something, like if we went out for dinner. But I started drinking kind of secretly in my room because I was devastated by these events in my family. And the drinking really kind of isolated me from people because I would stay in my room and
Hmm.
drink. And so over a 5 year period, roughly about a 5 year period, I just started to kind of disintegrate. Um, and I think it was a combination of I do think the alcohol played a part in it for sure, but I also think that the changing of Grenville as it started to change and quote loosen up a little bit because there was a change in regime
Yeah.
with the Farnsworths retiring and then sort of a group of people who formed a governing committee or whatever to run the community and the school. And as those, so they were implementing changes. There was a lot of
Yeah.
changes and little things, crazy little things like, we could listen to sort of forms of rock music, like people, just
Country
things,
music.
country music. Yeah, I mean, it
What?
wasn't, I mean, it was bit by bit, right? It wasn't
Yeah.
like we could go hog wild on rap or anything, Um, clothing
Jeans.
restrictions kind of changed a little bit. I think people were starting to wear jeans.
Yeah.
Um,
97. Yeah.
and yeah, and so things were changing, and I started to feel like the ground was shifting under me, and I couldn't quite navigate it very well. I was, even though I loved these changes and I wanted these changes, it made me feel very insecure. And so there was a point in time where we were asked, I think they had they needed single people, like Beth said earlier, single people were kind of like the horses of the community. But we were also like the Rubik's Cube people who could always be moved because we didn't have a lot of
Mhm.
stuff and we didn't have families. So we were always inserted into different community homes, at different
Yeah.
times. So I was asked if I wanted to move off campus into a home with some community members. They needed the space on campus for somebody else to live. And I remember at that time thinking that it was just a matter of time until I left because I felt if I wasn't under
Mm.
this thing of this oppressive kind of control, that I would do what Father Farnser said I would do, which is that I would just spin out of control and I would, become a prostitute or whatever, right? Like I was sort of on a knife edge of that experience of sort of wanting to leave and experiencing freedom. And so I did move. And that was the beginning of the end for me. I started to this is where it gets ugly, really ugly for me. I hate talking about it, but just the drinking really escalated for me. And I was spending more and more time. Somebody introduced a friend outside of the community introduced me to online dating.
Mhm.
And I started to dabble in that, but it was all covertly because I couldn't tell anybody that I was doing this. And the drinking fueled a real rampage of dating. And I knew that I couldn't drink and act out as I was in Brockville because there were so many people in Brockville that knew me as a teacher or knew of the school, and I couldn't do that. So I ended up going to Ottawa and Kingston to do what I wanted to do. And what I experienced was just this incredible feeling of freedom. The alcohol made me feel free,
Mhm.
and the relationships that I got involved in made me feel loved. And it was an incredibly powerful combination for me that made me feel what I've what I'd been yearning for years and years. Like Beth described being in a cage. It was like being in a cage.
Yeah.
So I got really out of control. I got very out of control, which was what I was told would happen.
Mhm.
I hate to say he was right, but but he was right and he wasn't right. I think
It's a
that,
self-fulfilling prophecy, and he set it up. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
and I just think it was so long. I was repressed for so long, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
so I ended up with a pregnancy and a miscarriage and a breakdown. I had a breakdown and I had to be taken away. They didn't want the students to see me in that shape. So I ended up moving off campus to Father Farnser's house,
Wow.
where where they tried to bring me to Jesus. and I was in no shape to be brought to Jesus. I was, I was an absolute mess. And so he kept putting pressure on me, lots of pressure. And I snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. And I ended up going to the leader of the community and saying, I can't live with them anymore. And so they called my family and asked them to come and pick me up. And so that's how I left. My sister came and picked me up and took me to her house, and she started to help me deal with my life. She got me a psychiatrist appointment. Like she hooked me up with a psychiatrist, and I knew I had a drinking problem. I didn't at that point. I'd had a suicide attempt. Actually, this is interesting. I left when I left Grenville. I like Beth said. Um, a lot of my peers had left angry. They had left, like some of my women friends at Grenville had left really angry. They had come to the realization that it was messed up and that it was wrong what was happening there, and they left. And I was really upset that they left because we had taken vows, how dare you leave? And how dare you even have the nerve to think that way, that
Yeah.
it was wrong? And so when I left with my tail between my legs. I never had a moment of fuck you.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that it was wrong. I knew I was wrong. And so I remember after I left, when my sister took me to her house, I had a lot of difficulty there because we had been separated. I had been separated from my family, and there was a lot of mistrust, and it was dysfunction. I couldn't really live with them. It was very hard, and I didn't know where to go. So I called the Community of Jesus and I talked to Sister Irene, and I said, can I come down there because I can't live here with my sister. I was freaking out living with my sister because I felt like she was the devil, and I'd been told and they said, no, we think you need to stay up there and go to rehab. And so I did. I got into rehab, and then I um, started my recovery. And I don't know whether we stop here because you wanted to know what happened after we left. I can talk about that in the next part if you want.
Wow.
Yeah, I think,
Amazing.
I mean, you guys are just so brave and so strong. And I would definitely love to hear the rest of your story in our next episode. I do want to ask, and then I want to ask Carrie her experience, because each one is so unique and personal. Um, but Beth, I heard you say, it really wasn't for quite a few years after you left that you realized you needed therapy. And Sarah, you were seeing a psychiatrist, you went into rehab, you're working on sobriety. But how long, and I'll ask all three of you, how long did it take for you to start to address the trauma of what you experienced? When did it
Mm.
start to get from leaving and with your tail between your legs and not being angry and trying to stay connected to really understanding that you had been really horrifically abused?
Well, I guess I'll start.
Yeah.
It's been I would say it's been uh layers of coming to that understanding. Like you ended your question by understanding that I'd been horribly abused. I actually didn't understand that until I started writing my book, which was like years after I'd started the lawsuit. Like it took so long to come to any kind of depth of understanding uh, of what I'd been through or others had been through. But backtracking, and I didn't start writing the book till recently, so that would have been like almost 20 years. 20 years since I left that I started writing the book and I'd come to the understanding of what had happened. But um backtracking, I started to fall apart. Like Sarah had drinking, I had eating disorder. So that's I feel like in both of our cases, they're really difficult things to get through, maybe a lifetime of recovery, but they kind of helped us to find the the outside care we desperately needed. And for me, I started not being able to handle my eating disorder a couple years after I got married, after I'd left the community. And I didn't, when I finally got diagnosed, I didn't have a clue that it was connected to Grenville. I just thought I was a glutton, or, fat. And I am so like, yeah, it just took years to chip away at the onion, as it were, for me. But I remember the very first time when I got diagnosed with bulimia and PTSD. I remember the therapist said, well, it was a psychologist, and she said, "I'm not going to touch your eating disorder with a 10-foot pole, because there's so much more going on underneath." And I looked at her like confused, thinking, "What are you talking about? Like, is there a reason why I can't stop eating apart from the fact that I'm a glutton?" Like, I had no idea that there was trauma got like underneath. And it's taken a long time to chip away at my blindness, I guess, and my normalization. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think that same thing. It was chipping away, but um, it's interesting because for the lawsuit and the claim, we had to recount, what happened, and we had to provide evidence from psychiatrist appointments about talking about Grenville.
Hmm.
And when I looked over all my notes, really, I don't know, for the first however many years, it could have been 7 years after I left or something, like the only mention I made of Grenville was in relation to grief, feeling grief of the loss of the people, and the loss, yeah, I guess the loss of the people or the family, I guess loss of the family. And then the only other time it came up was when I would have a reaction to somebody like a boss, and I'd
Hmm.
go into almost like I had like a breakdown at one point in my career, because I was triggered by something that the boss had done or was going to do, or a talk or something that happened, and I completely lost it. I had to go into the hospital.
Hmm.
And so it's like I didn't really know, like Beth
Yeah.
said, I didn't really know how much it had affected me. So how can you talk about it if you don't
Hmm.
know?
Exactly.
And so it wasn't until the book, right, trying to get this book out, that it started to come out, and then also validation through in 2007 when the FatNet and the paper and the press coverage started coming out. That's what started cracking it. Same with Beth. I mean, what my experience was the same.
Yeah.
So
For
I'm
me,
wondering if we can, um, we haven't gotten to Carrie's story yet, and I'm wondering if we can um, come to a close on this one and start our next episode with Carrie's story of leaving, as it was from the community of Jesus as a professed religious sister, um, and then from there talk about life, since then, for all three of you. Would that be okay?
sure.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you for being so brave, and sharing these really personal, hard, um, parts of your lives with us. And I'm looking forward to talking about life on the other side for you guys. So we'll see you next
Thanks.
episode.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.